I think it'd be nice if somebody introduced everybody by name to us. Come on, Julie, you know who everybody is. Introduce everybody.
First of all, we have Madam Yanshulani, and we have Deb over here. This is Deb Farrelly. This is Arnold Carroll. This is Linda. This is Greg. You're not looking.
I'm listening as much as I can.
Look at them. It's Paul, and that's Alana.
What are their last names, dear? I don't give a hoot what their front names are.
Freelander.
What?
Freelander.
Freelander.
No, not Lander. Land.
Freeland.
Yes, Freeland. And we have John Roger. We have Hans Team. And we have Maddie Team. And we have Adelaide Stewart. It's my bedtime. You don't realize I get up at 4 and it's time to go to bed.
What on earth you get up at 4 for?
Because I have to be working at 6.
Oh.
And then we have Paul. I will not make the same mistake twice.
Tried it.
And we have Joe Koblenz. And we have Moro Baruch. And we have Kuri. And we have Stuart Adams. And here's Juliet. Where's Kobe? And there is Juliet.
Where's Kobe?
Anyway, we have Juliet.
Well, Kobe is probably coming as soon as she gets that child to bed. Anyway, I thought that it would be very nice to have an evening of questions. We don't have to, of course. If it gets very dull, well, maybe we can think of something else to do. But it's almost 2 years, isn't it, since I was here? It's about 18 months ago. And I can remember what a happy evening the last evening here was. I didn't forget it. I enjoyed it very much. And I thought it would be lovely, as I had not been too tired from this week's visit. I was afraid I might be tireder than I was, because we've been traveling steadily since the 4th of August, and an awful lot of places. What was it we figured out today? 47 places we've been. More than that, much more than that. Anyway, we've been to an awful lot of countries and places and provinces and cities and villages. And I didn't know how I would feel when I came back, but I'm feeling all right. And that's why I suggested to Alain Prévu that the pioneers could come together tonight so I'd be able to see you all more than once, because we're going to have another meeting before I go. On what date did we say? What date?
20th.
The 20th, you see. And anyway, the point is that I feel that lots of times the pioneers have questions, they have ideas, they may have suggestions that would be benefit to each other. For that matter, it might be a benefit to me, and that we could just have a nice informal time together. There was something I said I wanted to bring up tonight. What was it? I told Provias, or you in the car, I said, don't forget, this is something that we should bring up tonight. Now I can't think what it was.
You have to wait for proof.
Everything hanging on Provi coming and telling us shows that we're a little tireder than we thought we were. What was it? Was it cheap?
Positive thinking.
No, but that. I tell you, there's going to be some tape with the Persian interpolations.
No, it's not.
Closed. But he's not closed. Not Greg, my dear. He's all ears and quietness. Well, I have an idea to start the ball rolling. I was saying today that I think that people forget that the most practical person in the whole world when Baha'u'llah was alive was Baha'u'llah himself. And I don't think the Baha'is think of that. They think of Baha'u'llah as a manifestation of God, and, you know, just like the sun shining in heaven, and all of his marvelous qualities. He's so far beyond our comprehension in his characteristics as the reflection of Almighty God that it's almost impossible to conceive of what he's like, you see. But I don't think that we conceive of him as having been the most practical man alive in his day. Because how could he give us a world order designed by Almighty God to bring the kingdom of heaven on earth and change the whole aspect of the planet if he weren't the most practical man in the world? But the Baha'is, I don't mean anybody here, but I mean very often I have found that the Baha'is believe that spirituality in some mysterious way is linked to being impractical. They think if they are impractical, that they're spiritual. They think, they say, Baha'u'llah will do it. Why on earth should he? What are you doing? He wasn't impractical. Why are you impractical? The degree of practicality of Amatu'l Bahá and Shoghi Effendi is simply unbelievable. Shoghi Effendi was a brilliant executor, not only a brilliant planner, he was a brilliant, dynamic executor. He planned very carefully. He kept track of everything very carefully. He was so careful and exact and methodical that he had a habit. He had visiting cards. A little old-fashioned, very nice English, simple, hard card with an engraved name. And with the exception of sending these with a book like God Passes By, or one of his translations of the writings like the Gleanings or the Prayers and Meditations to prominent people that he'd known, like Sir Ronald Storrs or his old tutor in Oxford or some prominent person, these cards, as far as I could see, were never used at all except to keep notes on. And he liked very much small things. He was small himself. You know, Baha'u'llah was much smaller than Abdul Bahá. And Shoghi Effendi very strongly resembled Baha'u'llah in his body. The greatest holy Leaf used to take his hands and look at them and say, these are the hands of my father. And in his height and in the shape of his body, he had very strong resemblance to Baha'u'llah. Not necessarily the face, but the body. Anyway, the point is that Shoghi Effendi liked small things. He wrote all of his books on pieces of paper about that size, about 3 by 5 inches. A small lined pad. When I write, I get a hold of a huge foolscap size paper, and I just, sprawl down it. And Shoghi Effendi wrote with his very methodical handwriting, very compactly, on these small sheets. He wrote the whole of God Passes By on sheets of paper that size. And he not only wrote it once, longhand, having made notes for 1 year, and thinking about God Passes By, he read everything he had on the Baha'i faith in Haifa, which meant all the tablets, all the books of references, all the tablets that were sent by copies of individual tablets from Persia that were sent and compiled by spiritual assemblies and had the signature, the seal of the local assembly on it that this was a true copy. And they sent all of these manuscript copies of tablets to the Guardian. Sometimes there were nothing of significance in them. They were letters of Baha'u'llah. Sometimes there were very rare and extraordinary sentences in them. But the point is that he read every single thing that he had in Haifa. For 1 year he made very copious notes. Then he sat down and he wrote this whole thing, God Passes By, longhand. Then he rewrote it all longhand, from beginning to end. The same size paper, a clean copy, relatively speaking. And as he rewrote it, he brushed it up and perfected it. Then, having done that, he sat down on a tiny little portable typewriter about that big and proceeded to type the whole manuscript of God Passes By himself. When he was at full speed, he could use 4 fingers. And he used to type that book, it was in the wartime when he wrote it. He typed that sometimes 10 hours a day. I've never seen anything like it. The Guardian's capacity for work was unbelievable. And he had 6 copies, the original, and 5 copies his machine would take of light copy paper. And we'd sit down at night in his bedroom. He had a very, very large table in the middle of the room. He'd give me 3 copies, and he'd take 3 copies, and we'd proofread it out loud. Accent under the SH. Oh, the part about the Bob with all those accents was terribly hard. Because, for instance, there's Vahed and Vahid. And the only way to tell the difference in English is the accent. It comes in a different place on the word, you see. Well, we do that till we were blind with fatigue. Then when he had that all carefully done, he'd mail these off, batch after batch, to Horace Holly in the United States to get ready for the publication of the book. Anyway, what I'm trying to say is this tremendous executive capacity of the Guardian was reflected in everything that he did, his thoroughness. And he kept in his pocket all kinds of notes on his visiting cards. And I can remember when we were away in the summer, he would put all the dates of, March, or it wouldn't be March, it would be June 1st, 2nd, 3rd, 4th, 5th, 7th, 8th, so on, all down like that. And then he'd see if he got his London Times for that date, which he read every day. And he'd tick it off. He'd received the copy of the 1st of the month, the 2nd of the month, the 3rd of the month. He had the whole list there. He didn't trust to a little calendar. He had it all written out carefully there. As the paper came, he scratched it off. And if he didn't get one of those copies, he was really quite upset, because he followed the political news of the world so exactly. He was a great reader of the political news and the advanced scientific news, if you like. Supposing some professor gave his opinion about what he thought the nature of the atomic war would be. Well, that was the sort of thing that Shoghi Effendi would read with great interest, you see. He read what was going on in the world and what the brains of the world were thinking. I never saw him look at the Reader's Digest, Time, or Newsweek in my whole life. I mean, he was not interested, but he read the Times of London. He read the Jerusalem Post of Israel. And when we were in Europe, he read the Journal de Genève, which, if you know, the European papers had some of the finest editorials in Europe were in the Journal de Genève. And then he read the New York Herald Tribune every day when we were in Europe. He had the Jerusalem Post forwarded from Israel. In other words, what was going on in the world, he followed with intense interest. But this was typical of this executive capacity of Shoghi Effendi. His attention, as I said, to detail, his thoroughness, his carrying out plans, his foreseeing what would happen, making a plan, making an objective, following through to reach that objective. And so often I find that the Baha'is seem to think that, first of all, Baha'u'llah is going to do everything, which, of course, in theory, I suppose that he can, but whether he wants to without our doing anything is another question. And they seem to think that it is a virtue to be incompetent. And, of course, that's absolutely ridiculous. It doesn't make any kind of sense if you consider what Baha'u'llah was like, what Abdul Baha was like, and what Shoghi Effendi was like. Yeah.
This is one thing I've always wondered. Since you brought up the Guardian's executive capacity, I'll ask this question. I've read The Priceless Pearl, and Shoghi Effendi is someone I really would have wanted to meet.
I should think so.
But the question I always ask myself is, did he sleep much?
Well, I'll tell you, he wanted to sleep more than he did. You see, he had so many worries. And I can remember that Chogi Effendi, the burden of his work increased, and his worries increased. Everything increased as time went by. The cause expanded, the problems were greater, the work was heavier, and many times he used to say, "Oh, if I could just once more sleep the sleep of my youth, if I could once more sleep 10 hours." It was very, very touching to me, because towards the end of his life he may have slept, 6 or 7 hours a night, if that much, whereas he really needed more sleep than that. But he had too much on his mind. He really had a tremendous amount on his mind. He said to me that last year of his life, the last summer, as a matter of fact, before he died, when we were away, he said, "Do you realize that if I now have to read, only read, not answering letters, you see, or not doing anything else," he said, "I have to read at least 3 hours a day to keep abreast of what is coming in." He had newsletters from different countries, you see. And in order to keep his finger on minutes of the NSAs, we received all the minutes of all the NSAs. We still do in Haifa. We received the minutes of all the national assemblies in the world. The only one he couldn't read was the German ones. He could read Persian, Arabic, and English. And I used to read the German one and then would abbreviate anything that was of interest, you see. But the point is, he had to read all of these things, and the burden was getting unbelievably heavy. And he didn't get as much sleep towards the end of his life as he would have liked to have had. He tried to get it, but he didn't get it. I can't hear you.
Can I ask what he died of? Is it a heart attack?
He died with thrombosis of the heart. He'd had Asiatic flu, but he was recovered from that. And then he must have died in an instant in the night. And it was thrombosis of the heart.
I think now that Provi is here, Khánum, we can ask her
What was it, Provi? I wanted to say, I said, remind me, I want to talk about it tonight.
The only word that comes to my mind is poverty. But I don't know if it has to do with
Poverty? Oh no, we were talking about poverty and riches, and I was saying that in this new compilation, The Desire of the World, that if you read what Baha'u'llah says on the subject of poverty and riches and the poor vis-a-vis the rich and so on, it's terrific. And he ends up by a pretty strong emphasis on poverty. No virtue in being rich. He doesn't mean that you aren't allowed to be rich, but there's certainly no virtue in being rich, whereas there's a lot of virtue evidently in being poor.
Why is there virtue in being?
Desire of the World? Well, read it. And draw your own conclusions. I can't draw the conclusions from it, but I think it's pretty clear. It's very extraordinary, his remarks.
Is that the subject you're trying to remember?
It was one of them, wasn't exactly it.
But the way the future of the world will go, when humanity has a universal planet, and where all the resources of the world will be shared, and there'll be a new consciousness, it seems to me that the world will prosper, and that the poor will become not necessarily obsolete, but...
Well, it's all in the teachings. I mean, it's socialism. In this sense, it's socialistic, and it's already in force in most of the nations of the world, certainly all the advanced nations of the world. The poor, the very poor, are subsidized, and the very rich are very heavily taxed. And that is what has happened all over the world. It's happened since he told in the Baha'i teaching since he wrote this principle, that you would subsidize the poor if they were below a certain level, and you would heavily tax the rich if they were above a certain level, and that's what's happening through more socialistic concept. But on the other hand, the Baha'is believe in, what do you call it, not capitalism, independent
Free enterprise.
independent enterprise, yes, the right of independent enterprise. It's a very interesting system, you know, the Baha'i system is quite different from anything else. Yes, Joe?
That's what I was going to say. I remember Roland Nestal, former counselor Roland Nestal, received a letter from the Guardian. Apparently he had asked a question like this.
Mm-hmm.
And Roland showed me the letter. And the one thing that struck me, and it was the idea that Shoghi Effendi said that it would be the future Baha'i system was neither socialism nor free enterprise, but taking the best from both. And there was one phrase, something about in socialism, the state owns the means of production, something like that, whereas in the Baha'i, what will evolve from Baha'i society is not state ownership, but rather central control.
Look, Joe,
like I don't remember what the language was.
let me tell you something. When you don't know what the language is, you shouldn't cite it.
Okay.
I've had so much experience. I have had the Baha'is. You see, you have to think of how much I travel and how many meetings I have with the Baha'is all over the world, in the cities and in the villages. All right, the villages, they don't know how to ask questions like that. But in the cities, they do. And I have found that the only way to deal properly with things of this nature, general things, yes, you can say that Baha'u'llah says we should love each other and not backbite, you know, and all these things. But when you're getting into a subject that is as exact as a prognosis of what the future society is going to be under the system of Baha'u'llah, you've got to quote the exact words, you see, because otherwise you just don't get a clear picture. And I've found that that's very true. I remember I learned a great deal, obviously, through my experiences with the Guardian. People would come and they would ask him a question from the Baha'i books. And he'd say, where did you get that from, you see? And they'd say, well, I got it, say, from the old Baha'i scriptures. If he had not translated it, he would not say anything on the subject. He said, I have to see the original. The Guardian say, I have to see the original. He would not commit himself until he saw the exact original words, although he had the whole Baha'i faith in his hand. But when he was asked a specific question, he was not going to answer unless he saw specifically the reference, you see. And he was certainly not going to go by any translation that wasn't his own, because he knew it might not be accurate, you see. And I remember in Baji when we had these meetings of the hands after the passing of Shoghi Effendi, and I can remember one occasion, of course you can imagine we had tremendously important subjects to discuss. The whole weight of the cause rested on us, and we had to save the cause, you see, after the passing of the Guardian. It was a terribly, terribly difficult time and a dangerous time. And I remember one of our, had many subjects to discuss, and one of the hands quoted a passage from Shoghi Effendi. Well, it was a quotation, you see. And we said, well, where is it? And he was really very offended, because the hands were, after all, very, relatively speaking, informed Baha'is. No, we said, we have to see it. Let's look it up. It was somewhere in the World Order letters. So we actually went, we got the passage, we found it. Didn't apply to where he was applying it because of what came before and what came after. He lifted a sentence out which in his mind applied to the discussion. But the context was such that you couldn't possibly apply it in this case, because that wasn't what it was applying to, you see. So I'm only using that as an example of how very, very exact we have to be. We have to really, when it comes to things that we want to say that, Shoghi Effendi said it wasn't going to be capitalism and it wasn't going to be free enterprise, is going to be something else, well, you better get the exact words, because then you're on safe ground. Otherwise, you're just, misrepresenting it or misunderstanding it, or I'm not understanding you carefully, but you're understanding what you heard from another person. You see what I'm getting at?
I have a question over here, Khánum. You know, especially in the States, I haven't heard the question much raised here in Haiti, but in the States, Baha'is are very paranoid about the time of the catastrophe. See, they like to talk about it and how it will come and how they will suffer and all those things. It's true, you know. It's true. I mean, I don't even know if in Canada they have the paranoia. In the States they have the paranoia. But all we hear about the time of the catastrophe is really pilgrim's notes. I mean, what has been written have nothing precise of what will happen. You see, the Guardian did not say.
Well, I never
this will
heard
happen.
Shoghi Effendi say anything precise about what would happen. You go to that book called The Citadel of Faith,
Yes.
which is a book that irritates me terribly because they did a terrible thing. They took, when Shoghi Effendi sent his messages to the Baha'i world, they were often in the form of telegrams, cables. And he really developed almost a language. You could call it Kabbalese if you like. If you see it without any of the interpolations that were put in, it's extraordinary how clear and concise it is. Now, in Wilmette, I mean, this is in the days of Shoghi Effendi, for what reason I do not know, they seemed to believe that the American Baha'is were fools and could not understand what it said in plain English. So, in parentheses, they kept putting the "the" and the "in" and the "of" and the "with." And sometimes, through that interpolation, they entirely changed the meaning. If you go back carefully over the Baha'i Newses, you will find that Shoghi Effendi has sent them a cable correcting the misinformation that was done by putting the "with" instead of the "and" or something like that, you see. But he couldn't do it all the time. Now, the British never did that. Whatever they got from Shoghi Effendi, they just published it in the Baha'i News. You either understood it or you didn't, but that's what they had received over his signature. So you could fool around like themselves with that, you see. Now, when the American NSA got out the Citadel of Faith, they took the cables that had been published in the Baha'i News, which, as I said, was with the Guardian really almost another language, Kabbalese, very concise and very interesting, and beautifully expressed, but quite different from composition. And they left out all these brackets. I don't mean parentheses, brackets. They took out all the brackets. So that the mistakes that they had made in interpretation, that previously you could say, well, it's in brackets, I don't think that's what he meant, had been removed. You see?
Together.
And yes, and it was extremely inaccurate. Now, the House of Justice corrected that, informed them that in the future, whenever they published any of that material, they had to go back to the original text of Shoghi Effendi and forget about those brackets, leave it entirely out, you see, because it caused too much misapprehension. But what I'm trying to get at is that nevertheless, in that book, The Citadel of Faith, you have more on the subject of what the nature of whatever is coming might be like than in any other source that I know. You have it to some extent in The Promised Day Has Come, and you have it in The Citadel of Faith. But what isn't in the writings, how can anybody tell you? The House of Justice won't tell you. I can't tell you. How can I tell you what I don't know?
Well, we've read things like some principal cities in the world will evaporate.
Look, you see, now this gets back to exactly what I was saying. The Baha'is, I don't know why, not all of them, thank heaven, but a great many Baha'is that should know better live in a sort of an intellectual vacuum. They don't bother to read what the great scientists of the world say the next war might be like. They don't bother to read what the great statesmen of the world say the next war might be like. They fiddle around with go away, some of the prophecies, go on, some of the prophecies of Baha'u'llah and Amatu'l Bahá and the things that Shoghi Effendi has written, you see. And this is all they know about it. If you have an atomic war, it isn't what Shoghi Effendi said in a pilgrim's note that's going to happen. It's what the scientists tell you is going to happen. Where do you suppose he got his information from? From scientific opinion. You see, this is the thing, if I may say so, that often irritates me very much amongst the Baha'is. You have a thing called science. You have scientists. They have knowledge. They have information. They can give a what do you call it? Überblick. What's the word in English?
Overview?
Yes, an overview. They can give you an idea of what is going to happen, a forecast, you see. All right, why don't you listen to them? They're worthy of being listened to. But no, you go on a pilgrim's note that perhaps didn't half understand what Shoghi Effendi said in the first place. See what I'm getting about practicality?
I have a question about the greatest name, the power of the greatest name to protect us, and especially to protect us now from ghosts and spirits and things like that.
You mean Allahu Akbar?
Yeah.
Well, what's the question?
Well, I'm afraid. I'm afraid of the voodoo. And I mean, I live out there in a village, and I'm teaching in the villages. And just the other day, a friend told me I was teaching on the porch of a witch doctor, and I didn't know it.
Well, what of it?
Well,
it's a good place to teach.
yeah. He wasn't listening. I mean, his daughter was a little. I guess I wonder, you know, sometimes I get so afraid that I can't even say the greatest name.
Afraid of what?
Of a ghost.
Of a ghost?
Yeah, and you said something in your last visit which in one way helped me an awful lot, and the other way kind of, oh, they really are there. But you said the last time that that Amatu'l Bahá said that if we see something, it's still only a reflection.
Yes.
And yet, well, that reflection sure sometimes gets a little violent, it seems to me.
Well, what do you mean, my dear? You've got to be more specific. What do you mean?
Well, if like something happens, like I feel like there's a ghost in the room or something like that, and I'm not the only one who feels that, you know, because an awful lot of the Haitians feel that way. This thing it cannot possibly ever in any way hurt us, or that's the question. Or with the greatest name, it can't help us, so if we pull ourselves together and say...
Well, I don't think you should mix it all up. I think you have to get your things straight. Some people are very psychic. Amatu'l Bahá never denied that there were psychic forces. On the contrary, he said, keep away from them. Then what did he say about them? He said that you are using forces that come into play after death. Don't cultivate those things in this world, because this is not the place for them, you see. Didn't deny their existence. He just said don't use them in the wrong place. All I know about psychic phenomena is what I've heard from my mother. Now, this is not in the teachings, what I've heard from my own mother, because my grandmother was very psychic. I think my mother probably had a lot of psychic capacity, psychic powers. Whether I have any or not, I don't know, because I never tried to cultivate them, but my mother did, and my grandmother had it, whether she wanted it or not, you see. Juliet Thompson was very psychic. They seem to attract psychic phenomena. People like that perhaps see ghosts or hear ghosts or have all kinds of peculiar experiences, but it doesn't mean it's anything to be particularly afraid of, you see. But when you get this superstition and fear coupled with each other that you have, particularly voodoo, in Africa and here, in Haiti, it's stronger here than anywhere else outside of Africa in the whole world, then you're up against a very concrete thing. There's no doubt about it, that it exists amongst the people, that it is a reality to them, that it has a hold on them, and that they're very afraid of it, you see. But that doesn't mean that we Baha'is should be afraid of it. Why should we? Considering that a lot of it's superstition, a lot of it's misinterpretation of phenomena they don't know anything about in the first place, a lot of it is fear. Why should a Baha'i, who is living, you might say, in the light of the illumination of the teachings of Baha'u'llah, with all of their spiritual values and all of their intellectual values and clarification, why should they be afraid of it? I don't know, unless, of course, they say it exists and then they're afraid that it might touch them. But I don't think that it can touch them, because I think it's the absence of other things. It's not non-existent, but compared to the light, the positive light of the teachings of Baha'u'llah, the power of prayer, the protection that Baha'u'llah vouchsafes his servants, I can't understand why that should be stronger than a lot of mixed up thinking and all kinds of psychic hanky-panky and superstition and fear. How could it be stronger? It couldn't be, you see. Not reasonable that it should be.
I can see something to that too. That sort of thing has bothered me a lot, and what's helped me is that if you think of what is the worst possibility of something like that, or any dangerous phenomenon, the worst thing is that you can be dead. And what's so bad about being dead?
I love that. What's so bad about being dead?
It's true.
I was afraid my own mother would appear.
Gee? Wait a moment. Where are we in this conversation now? Oh, it's not so bad to be dead. Violette has remembered a tablet of Abdu'l Bahá. Let her tell us what it is.
You know, there is a tablet of Abdu'l Bahá. I don't know what the question is, but from the answer, it sounds as if a woman from America speaks about fear, something that she is afraid of. And this fear is a reality to her. And Abdu'l Bahá, it's really the only one that at least I have heard of that he so specifically gives an answer to it. He said, put the greatest name in your room and a picture of Abdu'l Bahá in your room and pray. And with these three, the fear will be dispelled. Now you try it, because I don't know what was the problem of the fear of that lady, but it may have been the same thing, may have been the psychic phenomena for her. I don't know. But you try it and see if it doesn't help. The three together, he said, would disperse the fear.
You see, I was telling these villagers in one of these meetings that we had the other day that they have to realize that the dead cannot come back into the world of the living because they are dead. A baby that is born has never been known from the beginning of the world to the end of the world to go back into the uterus of its mother. It cannot. It has gone out. It has come into another world. Suddenly other faculties become operative. It can't ever go back into the world of the uterus. You die, you leave this world, you are born into a spiritual plane, and you are not going to be able to come back into this world, except, as I understand it, as a reflection. You see, you can have a reflection of the thoughts of the person who is dead. They don't want to go away. Instead of like a bird, if you've ever had a bird in a cage that was generations of birds in cages, they don't want to leave the cage at all, like a canary that's generations born in cages. You open the door of the cage, you have an awful time getting the bird out. I've tried it with birds myself. They don't want to leave the cage. Or they hop out, they hop right in again. They don't want to go out of the cage because they've never known anything but the cage. They're attached to the cage, you see. Now, as I understand it, it's a very good example of a person who dies. Their spirit should fly, because now they are free. They have gone into another realm. They're out of the cage. But they're afraid, because they're not detached. They haven't gotten out of it, you see. Instead of looking up and flying, they look back at the cage. They can't come into it, but they can be reflected according to what my mother told me Amatu'l Bahá had taught. Their thoughts, and even sounds of their thoughts, or their doings, if you like, in their mind, can be reflected under certain circumstances back into this atmosphere of ours. So you see them and you hear them. There's no doubt about it. Not always, not everybody, not different people. One person may be psychic and catch it, another person may not. One house may exist that never had any psychic phenomenon, another seems to be full of it. And of course there's so much nonsense going on in the world today. Look at these stupid, ghastly movies that you see on television. On television. It's perfectly horrible. This is exactly the reflection of this increasing superstition, if you like, and modern voodoo worship and fears in our society. Instead of thinking about God and His teachings and being a good Christian or a good Muslim or a good anything, far less a good Baha'i, they're going off onto all these crazy ideas, you see. It's a malady in the world today. But there's no reason why we Baha'is should catch it. It certainly should be quite immune from such things. But I do think that we have to help the people to understand these principles. I used to tell them when I talked in the villages in Africa, because the fear is very deep-seated and the belief is deep-seated. And the phenomena exists. I used to say, look, I am outside. I have left. I have gone out. But I come and I stand at the door, and I cannot come back. Impossible for me to come back into the house. But on the wall is a mirror, and you look into the mirror and you see me reflected. I'm out there. I'm not inside the house. But I'm out there, and you look into the mirror, you say, she's back, she's in the house, because you see me clearly in the mirror. But I'm still not in the house, and I cannot come into the house, you see. And I think this is what we must teach the villagers. As Violette said, teach them to put the greatest name, to say the greatest name, to have the photograph of Amatu'l Bahá, to pray, to realize that the light is always much stronger than the darkness, and so on, you see. Help to free them of these superstitions, and above all, help to make them understand. The people pooh-pooh it, you see, and that's not fair, because there is a phenomena, you see, and they're capitalizing on it out of their ignorance, and some of them out of their desire for power, like these voodoo creatures, whatever they are, priestesses. They capitalize on it because it gives them power. What power do these poor people have in the villages? Nothing. Barely enough to eat. So if they can have the power over the minds of other people through voodoo and hanky-panky and fear and all kinds of things, this much truth and the rest all imagination, then naturally they cling to these things, you see. And the others have nothing. They're entirely misguided, and they're governed by fear. Yes?
Some answer questions that Bahá talks about negative thoughts. And he says to, turn yourself to Baha'u'llah. And I can talk to some more actually later about some of the things that I do. So we're going to go on now. Yes.
Rúhíyyih Khánum, I heard you speak at the youth conference in Kansas City a few years ago, and you mentioned something that day that stuck with me, and to me it's sort of related. You said that you don't have to just pray to God. You don't have to just pray to Baha'u'llah. That it was possible, if you had a strong idea about who it was in the next world that you wanted to communicate with, that I believe you had said to Guardian said this, that if you had a very clear idea in your mind about who it was that you wanted to communicate to, that you could pray to someone.
It's the principle of intercession. You see, in the first place, no use praying to God direct, because none of us are ever going to know Him directly. But people don't understand that. But you cannot pray to something that you cannot ever come in contact with directly. I cannot go and put my hand in the sun, millions of miles away, and if I approached it by 100,000 miles nearer than I am now, I'd be killed immediately. You see, I can't stand it. I'm incompatible with it. But through the rays of the sun, I get all the benefits of the sun, which I'm supposed to get. All right, we get that through the manifestation of God. That's perfectly clear. So we pray, although we say, oh my God, after all, look at all the prayers of Baha'u'llah. They're all addressed to God. We are told to say those prayers. But we say it because we can reach him through Baha'u'llah in this day, through the manifestation of God. But then what Shoghi Effendi said is that we can ask others to intercede for us. And if you take that letter that he wrote about the passing of the greatest holy leaf, I think it's the last paragraph in the letter. He said, O thou greatest holy leaf, intercede for thy feeble, whatever it is, with thy father. He asked the greatest holy leaf to intercede with Baha'u'llah for him, Shoghi Effendi. Now this principle of intercession is there. I can pray to my mother. I can say, Mother, help me. But what I can pray to the greatest holy leaf. Sometimes I do. Sometimes at moments of intense anxiety, I get a hold of the greatest holy leaf, Martha, my mother, Keith, half a dozen of them, and say, do something for Pete's sake. You see, you're up there. Why don't you do something? But he said you have to have the concept clearly in your mind. You mustn't befuddle the whole thing. If I want to pray to my mother, I mustn't think my mother is the same as the greatest holy leaf. You see what I mean? If I want to pray to the greatest holy leaf, I mustn't start monkeying around with theology and saying that the greatest holy leaf is the same as Amatu'l Bahá, only one was perfect and manifested in the male form and the other was perfect and not manifested outwardly but inwardly, and all kinds of nonsense in theology, you see. You have to, as he said, have a clear idea, you see, of what you are doing, and then go ahead. You can ask the intercession of anyone. The principle of intercession is there. You may want to use it, you may not.
Let me ask you a specific question. The single event in my life which drew me towards spirituality was the death of my father. And he was not a Baha'i. And I became a Baha'i, I feel, because of the resulting dealings with that. And since then, this I feel a spiritual relationship has occurred, and I've read different things in the writings concerning the intercession of children on behalf of their parents, and then the benefit of a child that becomes a Baha'i for parents that never did become Baha'i. And I'm curious. My mother is a very spiritual person, but very, very wrapped up in the psychic area. And it's always like walking on glass, because it's very important to me to keep the crystal quality of the spirituality of our family, and yet not step into that psychic area but keep the relationship that I feel I have with my father.
Well, I don't see why you can't keep it. What's preventing you from keeping it? It's a real relationship between you and the soul of your father. Probably your father, when he passed away, saw everything very much more clearly. How do we know the mysteries of the soul? None of us know these mysteries. We really know very little, in this world, and we're going to die knowing very little. But we can see vaguely things like this. Maybe your father was very spiritually inclined. Something happened that when your father passed away, the veil was removed so that he did see the reality of Baha'u'llah, you see. How do you know? How do I know? All right, then he wanted to influence and guide you. Why not? Now you feel this closeness to the spirit of your father, which to me is probably a very real thing. What's the matter with that? Why should that pose any problems? You don't hear him talking to you when you're shaving or anything, do you? Well, all right. Why worry?
Well, I guess, yeah, I haven't shaved. Maybe I should start shaving.
I got carried away. I didn't notice the beard.
I guess my point is, how much of what I'm feeling is this, across this line of psychic how do you define what is a healthy spiritual relationship with the next world, and how do you find what is psychic?
I'm sure I don't know. I think when you start getting direct communications, we had a very good Baha'i when I was a child. Maybe he remembers the name of him, Albert Vail. You ever hear of Albert Vail? Albert Vail was a very old Baha'i, and he'd been a minister, and he was a very good Baha'i. He left the church, he accepted the Baha'i faith, and he was a marvelous Baha'i speaker and obviously a marvelous Baha'i teacher. And I can remember very clearly his services, but for a period of years he was subsidized by the National Assembly, you see, to go around and talk and deepen the Baha'is and so on. And then came the day when he couldn't really go on sort of being a Baha'i minister. He had to think about supporting himself. It couldn't be a permanent thing. And this was a terrible test to him. And he left the faith. But his wife was very psychic, so it didn't really make any difference because he was now getting his guidance direct from his wife, who was in communication with Baha'u'llah, you see. So worked out beautifully, skipped the whole intermediary procedures, and she got a direct pipeline to Baha'u'llah which she could communicate to him when they woke up in the morning, sort of thing.
Did she remain a Baha'i?
I don't know whether she ever was one, but why should she be any kind of an active Baha'i when she had a special relationship to Baha'u'llah? Everything has its own balance. And so many times Shoghi Effendi said, this is the religion of the golden mean, the middle of the way. Baha'u'llah, praises moderation. So strongly he speaks about moderation. Don't go to this extreme and don't go to that extreme. Keep somewhere safely in the middle.
Other the revealed prayers of Baha'u'llah and Amatu'l Bahá considered to have more power than the prayer that one would just say off the top of one's head?
I think that they have, in the sense that, but you have to make differentiation between every single thing that is written, for instance, by Abdul Baha and by Baha'u'llah, because only the word of the manifestation is the bread of life. The life-giving quality of faith to the whole world comes only through the manifestation. Baha'u'llah was the sun, Abdul Baha the moon. He reflected the light of the sun, but it was not the same thing, you see. It wasn't the primary radiation, if you like. And I think that if we try to think of what we would have missed in the Baha'i faith without those beautiful prayers of the Master, without his example, without his talks, without his elaboration of the teachings, where would we be? It was an infinite mercy of God to allow us to have a prophet for a forerunner, the supreme manifestation of God himself, the perfect exemplar in Abdul Baha, and then on top of that, this wonderful interpreter of the writings, Shoghi Effendi, and the builder, really, in the sense of getting the bricks there and starting to erect them, of the Guardian. It's a great blessing, but we must again have it clear in our minds. The difference is not all the same thing, all the same religion, not all the same thing. Each is its own special place.
You know, Ali Naqshbandi, when we were on a pilgrimage, gave a beautiful explanation on prayer. And he said that the prayers revealed by Baha'u'llah are like a ladder that would take us, let's say, to the rooftop where we could communicate with God. And so you say your prayers as they are written, and your soul gets closer. Then when you get to the presence, and when you're near your beloved, you can tell him anything you want to tell him. But first get there, and you get there through the prayers. And that was very touching.
Well,
So
I think
when you have
that's
your
a
own
beautiful
prayers-
example, but I think that everybody is free to do it in their own way. Ali was giving the pilgrims an example, so that they could take hold of the writings. Ali is a marvelous teacher. They can take hold of the word, and use the word, and then they can also express it themselves. But he didn't say first you have to do this and then that, and do it to the left and do it to the right. He'd never say anything like that. You can pray any way you want to. I personally have spent so many prayers of my whole life have been me speaking to Baha'u'llah, probably infinitely more than my reading the prayers. There may be other Baha'is who read the prayers and very seldom feel that they want to speak to Baha'u'llah themselves. And thank God we're all free to do it in our own way. But to deprive ourselves of the bounty of these prayers, of course, would be terrible.
I'd like to talk about a touchy subject. It's about our attitude about poverty, especially us as pioneers being, let's say, on a throne of comfort.
On what?
On a throne, let's say, of comfort. That is, compared to the average
You mean they're better off?
villager. Yes, that we're better off.
Yes.
And to teach things like, well, poverty is a virtue, poverty is wonderful, poverty will get you to heaven. I would just like to have some kind of guideline. Like myself, I believe that God wants us all of us to prosper. And that He, through social interaction and better civilization developed, that the whole of human society will become better, so that everybody will have enough to eat, everyone will be educated, we won't have to starve, we won't have to grovel for food, you know. So I'm just, it's a subject of controversy in the community.
Why should it be?
I don't know.
Well, I think you better get it all out and finish it as a subject of controversy, because it's perfectly clear in the Baha'i teachings. So if it's a subject of controversy, if you don't mind my saying so, then all of you that are having a controversy over it are wrong. Baha'u'llah says, be grateful, what is it? In prosperity, and patient in adversity. And he doesn't say it's a virtue to be rich, and he doesn't say it's a virtue to be poor. And I don't know why anybody should go around teaching the poor the way the Christians do, that it's blessed to be poor, or for that matter condemning themselves that they have more money than other people. What's the matter with us? Is that all we've got to say when we come to teach the Baha'i faith to people, is to talk about poverty and riches and these subjects? I don't think that this is the point at all. We're all going to be hit maybe by an atom bomb. Then would you mind telling me what difference it makes whether it's one of those ignorant voodoo people out there in the village that has barely got enough to eat, or it happens to be a very wealthy man? Is it going to make any difference to him if he's killed? I think that's putting the emphasis on absolutely the wrong thing. If we will establish the order of Baha'u'llah, we will eliminate the extremes of wealth and poverty. Let's get on with building the Baha'i order. What have we been asked to do? We haven't been asked to hair split about poverty and wealth. Where do you find that in any of the writings? Or from the House of Justice? They say, go out and teach the people. I don't know about the messages to the other conferences because I wasn't there, but I know the message to Montreal said very clearly that this is the time, they forecast that this is a period now when we will see much greater conversion in numbers to the Baha'i faith than before. It's right there in the message, you see. All right, let's get on with teaching the people the cause of Baha'u'llah. What do you care about whether they're poor or rich? Where does it say to teach the rich and not the poor, to teach the poor and not the rich? It says to teach people that Baha'u'llah has appeared in this world, that he has brought the remedy for all the ills of mankind, that this is the day which will not be followed by the night, that this is the going to see the establishment of the kingdom of heaven on earth. What do you have to go into socialism for? I don't understand it. I wouldn't waste 2 minutes on it, frankly. But if you got it on your minds, get it out. There's a good time to get it out.
No, I don't think that that the subject is brought up. You know, like we give classes on different things in the faith. Sometimes we give classes on different subjects. It's not like if we have an institute, for example.
Well, you mean to say you give classes here in Haiti on poverty and riches in your institute?
No.
I'm sorry, but I don't see what the problem
we
is.
have institute where we've had classes on child development and what else? What are the topics?
Well, what's that got to do with poverty and riches?
No, but what I mean to say is that what attitude to take about it? Shouldn't we encourage people to say that it is possible to improve one's life situation with faith in God, for example? You see?
No, I would never teach anybody that. I could never, truthfully, as a Baha'i, ever go to another person and tell them that you accept Baha'u'llah and his teachings and you're going to find that you're going to have more material prosperity. I wouldn't dare say that, because what Baha'u'llah says is that the highest station is martyrdom. Boy, that's a long way from material prosperity. That's death. You read that hidden word. He says, if we could find it, only I don't want to take the time to it. He says, write all that we have revealed unto thee with the ink of light upon the tablet of thy spirit. If this should not be within thy power, then do something else. If thou canst not do this, then write with that crimson ink that hath been shed in my path. Sweeter is this to me than all else, did ye but know. And would you mind telling me what he's talking about? He says the sweetest thing in my sight is your blood shed in my path. Doesn't say anything at all about poverty or riches. I wouldn't dare teach anybody the Baha'i faith on the basis that in accepting the Baha'i faith, you are going to expect that God will help you to be in a better position materially. All I could tell anybody that is in accepting the Baha'i faith, you're accepting the manifestation of God for this day, and you have the privilege of being one of the builders of a new world order which will eventually come into being. How soon, I don't know. But when it does come into being, it's going to be an order based on justice, which of course will eliminate, according to the teachings of Baha'u'llah, when they are implemented in human society through governments, the extremes of wealth and poverty. But I wouldn't dare tell anybody anything else. Nor would I consider it particularly valuable. You know, people all the time approach you here as beggars. And I just say, allez-vous-en. I say, no, allez-vous-en. Because I don't think I haven't got sympathy for them. My heart aches for them, because there's terrible poverty in this country. But that does not mean that I should encourage mendicancy, because that's no solution. They lose every single bit of self-respect they ever had. It isn't solving the problems of the country. The problems of the country, like all countries, first of all, really are spiritual sickness, but then on top of that, terrific economic problems that can only be solved on a very, very large scale, a scale of politics, economics, sociology.
I'd like to add one thing on that subject. In the villages, we have seen that when we appear to teach, sometimes being white and coming in the car, sometimes the first people who come to us are people who are interested in material benefits. We're not ignorant of it, and we'll teach them all. And there will be a whole bunch of them who will say, yes, give me a card, I'm a Baha'i. And we know exactly as they're signing that maybe the next time we come back, they say, give me a job, or give me your shirt, or give me your shoes. We know that will happen also, that we take their names, because we know the faith is organic. And as it is living, it will chew up what is dead, and those people will be just drifted away. And through them, maybe through those people, the real ones will come the next time. we have seen that many times those people who are interested in material things and see that, say, especially a fat person in this country, is an image of wealth. It's true. They don't even look at Paul. They look at me and the dollars, you know. Those people that you don't even want them in the faith. You come back the next visit, and they have brought people, and the people have brought other people, and let's say after 3 or 4 visits, you really get to the real Baha'is. And those first ones have drifted away. You never see them again.
Because they can't profit by
They
it.
can't profit by it, but they have brought the real ones. But this is one point, I don't know if you experience it.
It takes a great deal of understanding. It takes a great deal of patience and a great deal of understanding. But I think that it's very, very dangerous in a country as poor as this, where the needs are so crying and so great and the injustice is so great, for the Baha'is not to be extremely careful in their approach, because we are not in the position of the missionaries. I mean, they ask, they would like us, where was it we were the other day? They said, give us a Baha'i school. I don't know, one of these villages that we were in just the other day. You say, give us a Baha'i school. We need a school here. Open a school. Well, we can't. We haven't got the money. We're not missionaries. We haven't got millions and billions of dollars to draw on behind us. We haven't. So we can't, you see. You have to just not allow it to reach that point. The people have got to accept Baha'u'llah because they love Baha'u'llah and they believe he's the truth. Not because of any personal advantage they think they're going to get from us.
Or from Baha'u'llah.
Or from Baha'u'llah. But that's at least between them and Baha'u'llah. But certainly I wouldn't dare tell them they're going to get a personal advantage through accepting Baha'u'llah. That's very dangerous.
Is it not true that the faith is kind of taking a different direction now in terms of development? Like the Universal House of Justice is encouraging, particularly the Canadian NSA, to become involved in the development program. So does that mean that the Baha'is are becoming more concerned about the material welfare of the people in these underdeveloped countries?
No, I think that the House of Justice is very glad if Baha'is can show that they are sufficiently responsible and connected with a sufficiently well-organized business proposition to receive Canadian aid. Just as simple as that. But it doesn't mean that the House of Justice is trying to milk the Canadian government to give us money so that we Baha'is can spend it on our projects. Far, far from it. If Canadian aid is going to be spent in these countries, let's take Canada because we both know that that's the one who's involved in it, you see, with their programs. If the Canadian aid can be involved in anything that the Baha'is become the instrument for helping the Canadian aid on a special project to do good, well, that's fine because it gives us some prestige because they say, look, those Baha'is are reliable. They're involved in a sound project. They're good people. They'll see it through. They'll be careful, you see, whatever the nature of the thing may be. But still, we're not taking any government money for our own projects. We're only offering Baha'is who are sound and worthy, so to speak, on a project which would appeal to the Canadian government, whether a Baptist did it, an Adventist did it, a Mohammedan did it, or a Baha'i. Quite a different thing.
Yeah, I was going to mention that I've gone through various ways of dealing with things like what you dealt with in Kai there with the man coming up with this. When will the Baha'i school be built?
Well, we've heard that all over the world, and every place we've ever gone.
The thing that's been working for me most recently is just to make nothing at all of it. And I think we attract the kind of people, we attract people according to the subjects we make something of, or the emphasis we put, the things we put emphasis on. And I think kind of by ignoring or just not getting into material things at all, or not linking the faith to, or my coming to talk about the faith to anything material, the question, that type of question, though it comes up, is very easily then dealt with, so that at least people won't ask me again. Might have
No,
somebody else again.
it's
you know, but at
not.
least
It's neither fair nor is it safe. Neither fair. Oh my goodness, I had the most terrible experience in Africa myself. I was in, where was it? Liberia, wasn't it? We were motoring after the Monrovian conference in Africa, and a big meeting was arranged for us in a village. We were going on our way back across the next country in Africa. And we came to a large village, and they had gone to a great deal of trouble. They had put pillars in the ground of, palm tree bowls or something or other, and they had put a very beautiful canopy of palms over the top as a shade, and they'd really, about the whole area of this house, it was quite a lot of trouble. It wasn't just a small thing like a little arch of palm leaves or something. It was quite a display. And they didn't seem very responsive when I was talking to them. And then when the meeting was open to questions, they said, well, how soon are you going to build the school you promised us? Oh, my dear, one of my dear fellow hands had been through there and said the Baha'is will build you a school.
You should have built it then.
Well, no, they just felt expansive, you see, that of course we will come and we will build you a school, and we would love to give you a school, and you can be sure, that someday we'll give you a school. And it was an extremely, you might say spontaneous, but devastatingly compromising remark, you see. And then here comes Violet and I and a member of the NSA to translate and so on, and these people are very indignant. Where is the school? When you're going to build the school that you promised us, you see? What do you say to that? Very, very difficult. We have to be extremely careful not to say, oh, well, we'll come, we'll do, you wait, you give us time, we'll be back. You see, you just keep off it. As Joe said, just close that door. If they want that kind of a handout, I'm sorry, they'll have to go to the missionaries. But they can't get it from us because we neither have the possibility nor are we in that phase of the development of the cause. Nor, as far as I know, will we ever buy Baha'is. I remember a man coming after the war from Ecuador, and he was a Jew and a great friend of the Baha'is there. And that was before we had mass conversion. And he said, he came, he had an introduction, and I invited him to lunch, and we had a nice time together. And he said, you Baha'is don't know how to do it. He said, you can have as many Baha'is as you want. If you want numbers, it's very simple. He said, you open a soup kitchen, and you ask your American Baha'is in America to send clothes for these poor Indians. You get all the Baha'is you want. And I looked at him in horror. I said, you think we want to buy Baha'is? We don't want to buy Baha'is. We want the Baha'is to accept this faith because it's from God and because they believe it is the truth for this day. We don't want them to accept it because we're giving them something to eat and some clothes. That's for the missionaries. Let them do it that way. And they do. They buy them left and right.
Well, I don't know if I think I told you, the man who came to the house asking for money for his school in Jacmel. I'd like to say that to the friends here. When Rúhíyyih Khánum came to Jacmel, there was a man who came right at the meeting, the night of the meeting. He wanted to talk to me, and then we had to go to the meeting, and I said, come tomorrow. And finally he came, he says, I'm the manager, director of a small school, and we're doing assistance work and all that, alphabetization and all this. And since your big boss is here, we would like to appeal to her if she could help and give us some money. And I say, my big boss is here. Who's my big boss? I don't have any big boss. And he says, well, the lady who's staying at the Jacmelian. So they knew about she's staying there. And they said, oh, she's not a big boss. She came to visit us because she loves us. And he was shocked. That was the first shock. And she loves everybody. And she came to see us because she really wants to see us. Now, as to help you, I am not in any position to help by any means. And the Baha'is of this community are usually students, young people who are struggling to make a living of their own. But if you want, we can get them together and ask them what they think. And he was so disappointed that it came to some poor Haitians who will have to help his school. And I said, I don't know when I will get them together, but I will promise you, the next time I find them together, I will talk about your school, and we'll see what they say. He almost said, don't even bother. And he says, well, I'll see you sometimes, I guess. And that was the end of it, and he left. Yes, Joe.
I mean, very often it just has come down to the point with me sometimes where somebody keeps insisting and insisting and insisting and insisting. At a meeting, I finally, without blowing up, I just very simply say in the Baha'i, Jesus Christ said, search ye, how do you say it?
Seek ye first the
Seek ye first the kingdom of heaven, and all other things shall be added thereunto. And the Baha'i faith is bringing kingdom of heaven. We're bringing God's message for this day. I mean, if you even heard a counselor do this once here. I mean, we will not be able to build you a school at this point. We may never be able to build you a school. Maybe someday you will be able to build yourself a school. But I'm not here for that. And if he keeps insisting, I say, well, if this is what you want from the faith, this faith is not the one that you should have. So, I mean, if somebody gets to that extreme, I mean, there is sometimes something has to be said straight out so that you can get off that subject.
Yes, but there's a lot of things you can say to people. I think that we need more wisdom in our dealings with each other and with everybody else, the government and the people in the villages. But I don't see any reason why we shouldn't tell people the plain, ordinary, naked truth. Tell them that this religion is given to us free of charge, and that we pass it on to other people entirely free of charge. It's a gift that was given us, and it's a gift we're giving to others. And that consequently we don't take any money from other people. Nobody can give us any money, unless they are a Baha'i. And if they are Baha'is, if they don't give, we can't publish our books and do our work and do this, that, and the other thing. But on the other hand, nobody is forced to give. They don't have to pay for the Baha'i chair they're sitting on, like the pew in the church and so on, you see. They don't have a frying pan tossed under their nose like the Catholic Church to put your contribution in, you see. And they have to understand that. No reason why they shouldn't know it. Whether they like it or not, it's another matter. Did you want to say something?
Well, I was just wondering if it would be correct to say that it's really a question of wisdom and the approach to a particular group of people. That economic development and material aspects of life are part of the Baha'i teachings like many other things. But if you're going to teach a Frenchman, you wouldn't necessarily be starting on the right foot to tell him that we don't drink alcoholic beverages.
Well, you have a little tact, I hope.
Yes, and the question of poverty and jobs and so forth is a very sensitive and difficult subject in a very poor country, particularly when the teacher is somebody who obviously has money. And so you get all tied up and complicated if you start on that subject. It's best to avoid that. It's not that we're trying to say that Baha'is favor poverty by advising that people not try to avoid this subject in teaching the faith. Is that?
If the people were communist inclined, then you'd really have a great deal of difficulty, because then they have the attitude of attack and subversion, you see. But if they are not, well then, as you say, if they are like that, you better avoid them. But if they're not, well then you have to, just as you say, handle it diplomatically, use your judgment.
Because there are populations of students, for instance, in some countries where it's a very effective way of getting their attention and attracting them to the faith to talk about the high vision of the future world order.
Oh, of course.
That can be a very useful approach, but certainly not in villages in Haiti.
Exactly. In other words, wisdom is to give the person what they can take and what they need from the teachings.
In Haiti, they love to hear the sufferings of Amatu'l Bahá and Amatu'l Bahá. I think it's because the country suffers itself. You can relate. I think this is the foot in the door, as to say, the suffering of Baha'u'llah. And somehow you teach everything, the administration, the principles, the laws, and all those things and then you deepen it again on the sufferings, and they keep strong. They relate stronger.
Where's Woody gone? I mean, not Woody. Oh, there she is.
See, Khanum, I can see what the problem is about poverty that they are talking about in a country like this. Any country where there is poverty is the main thing in the country. The moment you start talking about Baha'u'llah, it will get to the point that what material benefits can we get? What can you give us? This is an obvious thing. They are poor, and their first thing in their mind is how we can get rid of this poverty. I think in that sense, it's a very good thing in presentation of the faith to speak of the future of the faith. When the Baha'i state and the Baha'i teachings are in the world, as Rúhíyyih Khánum said, this poverty will disappear and so on and so forth. But personally, in 1 week in Haiti, I think the real poverty of this country is not the lack of money, but is the lack of self-respect. They have lost their self-respect. This is why they beg. And if we Baha'is can, even in a small degree, give this wealth back to the people, we have done them much greater good than if we can help them how to to be rich. Because that's not their problem. Their problem is that they have no pride in themselves anymore. It is the simplest thing. You see people well-dressed coming and asking and begging. And at least in our own Baha'i community, let's help. And as little as we can, because we can't do very much. The environment is such that you can't do very much. But at least the little that we can, give them back their self-respect, their pride. Let them understand that Baha'u'llah abhors begging. This is one of the things that he speaks about it. He says not to give to the beggar simply because he wants to eliminate this awful thing that people beg. So really, I think that if you talk about giving back that wealth to the people, it's a much greater thing than money. Because that doesn't solve the problem. This is one. The second thing I think is wonderful to speak about in educating Baha'is is that, yes, Amatu'l Bahá says that every person should learn some kind of a trade that they should, with which they can make a living. You see, this aspect of it is very good. It's positive and it's very good.
You want to ask a question?
Yeah, I'd like to say I really agree with that. And I think that there's a group of pioneers in this room that have started small women's conferences. Very small, not large, flashy things, but just small living room things. And what they seem to be teaching the women is to have this self-respect. The women are closer in one way to having it, to being able to recapture it than the men.
Mm-hmm.
Because they don't seem to have become so abased, I guess. And they seem to be the ones that have to hang on to the money and have to hang on to the few material things that they have, because after all, they have the children and they have this, they try and raise them. And the men could just disappear. And I think that is an excellent way to go after that problem, is to tackle the women first. After all, this is the age when the women's virtues are going to be in the forefront. And I think that the people who are on this women's committee should continue with that, because I think it really is a tremendous way to give them back self-respect that they lack. Because we cannot give them the material thing. And the men, it's very, very difficult. Very, very difficult to give the men that self-respect, because the men have, they feel they have the right to do whatever they please. So it's very difficult to talk to them. The women will listen and seem to be more receptive to what the faith has to say. So I'm very glad to hear you say that.
Khanum, I have a suggestion. I don't know what you think about it. I think it helps. The other day we heard in one of the villages in Lakai on the way, we heard that the Baha'is of that village they contributed $1 and few cents to the fund. You remember?
$1.40.
Now, when you hear something like that, publicize it. Everywhere you go, talk about it. Mention that village and say the Baha'is in such and such a village have done this. If you hear a little thing, tell everybody else, so that this is in itself, makes them respect themselves, that they are amongst us people who give. And they have this feeling. Don't keep it. What I mean is that in United States and Canada, we don't dream of talking about anybody or any community giving money. But here, talk about it. And let everybody hear that there are Baha'is, Haitian Baha'is, or communities who give to the fund. It encourages other people.
Well, I think that's obviously very, very true, and the House of Justice is trying to get people to realize all over the world, and they put a great deal of emphasis on it in the developing countries, that the National Assembly should try and get the people to understand the advantage of universal contribution, even if it's only a centime, you see. They have to understand that to give is the blessing. You give. Give it to God, give it for the work of the cause, just even 1 sou, it doesn't matter. Don't feel ashamed that it's so little, just give it. And then, as Violette says, talk about it, be proud that they did give it, happy that they gave it. It's a wonderful thing that they should have given it, you see. But I think that there's another aspect to this, and I think that the pioneers, all of us have come from affluent countries. And we've come from an affluent background. More or less. Some of us more, some of us less. But the fact remains that very often when the pioneers come, particularly to a country as poor as this country, they have a terrible feeling of guilt, you see. They feel as if they were monsters because they are well fed, they have an automobile, they have some money in the bank back in Canada or the United States. They have clothes, they can buy what they want to eat, so to speak, relatively speaking. And it makes them feel terribly guilty. Well, I don't think that that's a very healthy attitude, because I don't think that it helps the pioneer to render any services if all the time they're feeling bitterly guilty vis-a-vis the people. Just say, all right, who said the world had any justice in it? Baha'u'llah said it hasn't any at all. So don't worry over it, don't feel guilty over it, don't feel that you are wrong by having something, and that they're right by having nothing. Get on with the important part of bringing people into the faith, because this is a religion that in order to implement the order of Baha'u'llah requires millions of people. I always tell the Baha'is, you cannot make bread if you take a tablespoon, put a tiny little pinch of flour in it, and a teaspoonful of water, and go like that. You can't make a loaf of bread. You've got to have a great big quantity of flour and the water, and then you can work it. You can knead it. You can make the bread, but you've got to have the quantity, or you can't do it, because it doesn't work that way, you see. Now, in order to have the world order of Baha'u'llah, we have to have humanity in the faith. In one country or one region or all over the world eventually. Can't do it any other way, because his teachings all are applicable, except for the spiritual and moral teachings, which are individual. The whole thing applies to millions of human beings. You can't get the Baha'i system of economics, the Baha'i system of education. None of it's going to work. The Baha'i temples, the center, the Mashriq al-Azkar, the center of the community, the whole works. You can't do it without tens and hundreds of thousands and millions of thousands of human beings, you see, because that's the way that's going to work. It's an order for the masses. It's a system for society, and society is composed of thousands and thousands of individuals. And I think that this is what we Baha'is don't realize. People have got to enter the faith. They've got to come in so that we will have something eventually to work with to create the order of Baha'u'llah. I can't create it with what we've got now. How can we? 130 NSAs, all right. Based on what? A million Baha'is in India, it's the biggest Baha'i population in the world. 100,000, say, in Bolivia, maybe 100,000 in Kenya. You can't. Baha'u'llah says the individuals must teach. They don't have to. I'm not going to go to hell if I don't teach. I can be a Baha'i and believe in him till the day I die. That's between me and him. You can't force me to teach or anything. But still, I'm encouraged to teach. It's my privilege to teach individually. I should teach individually. The children can teach individually. Everybody can. And then other methods too. But we're not going to get anywhere unless we get people into the faith.
At the moment, it seems that the most rewarding aspect of evening right now, it seems to be with the children and the youth.
Well, that's good too.
We've been having success there.
But remember that that's fine, but you're not going to build a world order on a bunch of kids. It's going to take 15, 20 years till they grow up, and you have no guarantee that they'll be Baha'is when they become grown up. I'm sorry to say that I've seen far too much of the Baha'is of the world to believe that just because you've got a toddler running around now who's a Baha'i, who says that child will be brought up with sufficient faith and attachment to the cause that they'll be a Baha'i at 18, you don't know. That's the job. Easy enough to have children's classes and teach the children to say their prayers, but just to try to bring those children up so that they become Baha'i adults. That's the thing. So you need adults. You can't even run the administrative order without adults. Yes, dear.
Could you tell us from your impressions of Haiti so far, just to help us have that vision of the possibility of masses of people?
You can't ever, in the length of time that I've been here and will be here, go into a country in depth. But I'm very attached to Haiti. And I came here, as you know, about 18 months ago. And I don't know why. Perhaps because it is such a poor country. Perhaps because the people are so dear. They're very dear people, the Haitians. Very, very lovable, fine people. And I'm very attracted to Haiti. Already I'm regretting, as the days approach, when I'll have to leave it. And I'm thinking about whether I can ever come back again. And I don't feel that way about everywhere I go by a long shot. I go to hundreds of countries, and I think, well, if I ever see them again, it'd be very nice. But I have no urge to go back. But Haiti has a tremendous appeal for me. I think it is a country with tremendous, tremendous possibility. I think they're very lovely people. And I think that although some of them, from what I had heard, although some of them are mercenary, they're far less mercenary than I was led to believe, frankly. I think that there's a great deal of simplicity and dignity amongst the people. And I feel that as I go to the villages. Not all of them are like that. Far from it.
In the last few days, Sri Khánum, you've made quite a few comments which, putting together, have given me at least a much better perspective on the relative merits of service to the faith in a country like this, building up Baha'i communities in even the most remote areas, compared with the kind of service of some very impressive industrial endeavor or financial endeavor in an advanced urban environment in some other country. And I know all the people here are here because they, to some extent, have felt that the relative merits of being here, but still we often lose sight of that, I think, and don't evaluate it very properly. And maybe you could say a few words on that subject.
Well, I don't know. I think that the pioneers, first of all, are always extremely precious. Because people often ask me, why do I, in my talks, when I don't mean here, but at home, you see, in source places, so to speak, why do I give so much emphasis to the pioneers? Why do I talk so much about pioneering. And I tell them that it's just a question of mathematics. Because they're in a country, say, talking to a big American audience, well, most of them, for one reason or another, can't go pioneering. Whatever the reason may be, the probability is that they cannot. And then there's a lot that won't, you see. Even if they could, in theory, go pioneering, they won't. They don't feel the urge to go pioneering. So that the people who are willing to go and pioneer, a very small percentage of the Baha'i population of, as I say, source material, if you like, for pioneering. And therefore I think that the pioneers are an infinitely precious group of people. To me, they're extremely precious. And I think that they don't realize their own value. You know that old saying that you can't see the forest for the trees. You see it perfectly at a distance. You say, what a beautiful woods that is. Oh, if I could get up there and walk amongst those beautiful trees, that lovely forest. And you get there and all you see is just one bole of a tree after another. You can't see the forest at all. You're in the middle of it. And it's very, very hard not to lose your perspective as pioneers. I think that's the thing. You lose your perspective and you lose your sense of confidence. You think, oh, Lord, I'd be better if I was a pioneer in Taiwan. They seem to be doing better over there, you know, or maybe I better go to the Pacific Islands. What am I doing here in Haiti, sort of thing. And I think this is always a great danger, because Baha'is who are in a place and are beginning to be adapted and beginning to understand the people, and of course in a case like this beginning to understand the language, their value is tremendous. And a new person coming in just has to start the whole circus all over again. Whereas if you leave, you have to go and start your circus somewhere else. And you deprive this place where you got the know-how and the experience, and you had, at least in the beginning, the desire to come here. You deprive it, you see, of the benefit of your presence. I think this is very hard, not to lose your vision as a pioneer. And while I'm here, I'm going to say that to you, because I want to say it to you. I may not have another chance, but I really don't think you realize what you've done here, you two. And I don't think what you, poor man, realize what you've done with that school. Really. If you think that it's lost on your fellow Baha'is, and that they don't understand what you've been through and what you've accomplished, you're mistaken. I think it's marvelous what you've done here. And I think you must feel very, very grateful to Baha'u'llah that you've been able to render this wonderful service. I don't know, what happened the other day wouldn't be there if it weren't for you. And I know it's been terribly hard for you, both of you. I'm sure it has. But then now you're beginning to see that, God willing, it's beginning to roll a little, you know. I wanted to ask you, do you need any more teachers? Or you have enough?
I would be glad to have
Haitian teachers?
another French-speaking teacher. Really good French-speaking.
Good French-speaking. I don't know about the good part. I was thinking of poor old Mama. You know, I met a Baha'i in Jacmel, where he's in La Vallée. He used to work for this, what's the name of this organization? Yes, Foster Parents Association, and they had a school in Jacmel. Now, I don't suppose his French is the quality you want, or I don't even what he was teaching. What was he teaching?
He was teaching the kindergarten.
Kindergarten. That's very low. Probably doesn't need another kindergarten teacher. Lovely Baha'i. Very fine young man. Very devoted.
Plays the guitar, doesn't he?
Eh?
Plays the guitar?
No.
You know, there is... that's the one. Is he play the guitar? I don't know. Maybe he does, yes. You know, there is another one who works with Farad, Patrick. Patrick speaks very good French.
But is he a professional school teacher? No, they want somebody qualified. They want to keep the quality of the school up here. They can get 100 teachers by snapping their finger, but what kind of teachers?
Well, having Baha'is, you know, devoted Baha'is who are also qualified to come in.
There is Mario, the teacher of Mama.
Is he a school teacher?
He is a school teacher and he works for Plumber. And no, he used to work in the school in La Vallée. He's a very, very good school teacher. Every time we tell his name in La Vallée, everybody says good things about him. No.
Well, but they have to keep up the scholastic level of the school, you see. They'd have to be very careful who they employ. No, I just thought that I'd ask him if he needs more teachers. Well, any more questions? What's going out on the balcony there?
Very quiet.
The cool annex.
Yes. Without putting any excuses, you know, like for lethargy or anything like that, I'm not including that. I'm just talking about dedicated Baha'is. Isn't the most difficult task is to realize that it's going to take a long time, that really instant results are not going to happen, that it's a long,
well, what kind of results do you mean? You see,
to have strong, dedicated believers.
Oh, my dear, it takes a long time. I was saying the other day that I remember my mother in Montreal. We had the first community in Canada, a very united community, a very fine community, the biggest community, certainly at one point. And that only meant about maybe 30 or 40 people. And when we had the 19-day feast, Mother would know that some of them were coming to the meeting, but she used to call up all the ones that she wasn't sure if they were going to come. And she'd say, Madame Tremblay, are you coming to the meeting Friday night? You know it's the feast. And Madame Tremblay would say, well, I don't think so. I'm not feeling very well, or it's cold, or it's too far, or something, you see. And my mother would say, well, if you come, I'll send you home in a taxi. I'll pay for the taxi. Or, usually I was the taxi. And I would take all of these Baha'is home at 11 o'clock at night in a blizzard. And I remember once complaining because we had a car. We were only 2 Baha'is in Montreal in my girlhood that had cars. One was myself, I mean my father, not I, and the other was Freddie Schauflacher. Nobody else in the Baha'i community had that much money, and then of course very few people had cars relative to this way of 2 cars per family of our civilization. But in those days it just didn't exist. And I complained. I said, but Mother, it's terribly cold, you know. And she said, aren't you ashamed of yourself? You, a young woman with a car, you want her to go out and wait for the streetcar in this snowstorm? Aren't you ashamed? Well, of course, I was ashamed for about 30 seconds, and then I immediately got into the car and drove her the 20 minutes to Verdun and the 20 minutes back in the middle of the night, and so on, you see. And this was the way I was brought up. I was really a Baha'i chauffeur.
I think Rudy wants to ask you something.
Yes.
It was in response to what Ashley said about,
My point, I want to just finish my point is that it took so long to get the people, even in a place like Montreal, all literates taught by one of the disciples of Amatu'l Bahá, my mother, and everything else put together. But still it took so long to get some of them rooted in the cause sufficiently to come to a 19-day feast on their own power. So why should we be surprised at what time takes to get people here? It's only natural. We shouldn't expect babies to be adults. And I get very angry with the Baha'is because we're not surprised that that tiny little child is 3. Isn't she 3?
No, she's 16 months.
Well, whatever she is. We're not surprised that she's a baby. That's what I'm trying to say. But when we have Baha'i babies, we seem to think they should be adults. It's so unjust. Why should they be adults? They're babies in the faith. Yep.
No, when Adelie mentioned that, what came to my mind was the approach that Councillor Abab is introducing to us, what I find that it does is it helps us plant the seed of teaching and then deepens them, and the constant nurturing is taking place. So eventually will come from that.
You mean these teams?
The Rúhíyyih Institute technique, I'll call that. I'm not really well
The what?
about it.
The technique I mentioned to you when we're driving to Kajakmen, where we go with those booklets and we deepen the families. And
Well, that's fine. That's fine. It mustn't be the only method, but it's a wonderful thing.
But it does stimulate that kind of consistency.
Oh my goodness, this is what... Look, people ask me when I'm traveling, they say, how do we deepen? What is deepening? I say, just 2 words, go back. For us, no. For us, deepening is to think more, to talk more about the faith, to go to institutes if we've got them in summer schools, and read. But that's for us because we have the possibility. But most of the Baha'i world, to me, deepening means 2 words, go back. Go back and see them again. And they may ask you the same questions, and it may be a repetition of the previous meeting, because again, non-Baha'is that never heard 1 word about it will come into your meeting. From one side of Africa to the other, Violette and I, after all, were together. She's the witness. I always hoped that I could have a deepening meeting with the Baha'is, and I never had one. Because I never had a meeting that there weren't people who didn't know anything about the faith. So I had to begin all over again with progressive revelation and who Baha'u'llah was and the teachings, over and over and over. I never could get beyond that point, because there were always a lot of people that had come in, whatever the nature of the meeting, and they just had to be taught what it was all about in the beginning. But then didn't do the Baha'is to hear it all over again anyway. But I think this system you have is fine. But my point is that whatever system you have of going back and these teams which are so valuable, the whole picture's changed here in Haiti. As a matter of fact, it's lucky I didn't know about it. Because if I had known, I'm quite serious, at my age, with the amount of things I have to do, and my fatigue after this long journey through Canada, I would not have come back to Haiti if I had known the work was going so well in the villages. But I didn't know it. I didn't know anything about these teams. I didn't know that it was going way ahead so well. I remembered how nothing was happening in the villages 18 months ago. And I thought, well, if nobody else will go, I'm going. And that's why I came back. So you can see how much difference there is. If I wouldn't have come, if I'd known how well you were doing.
Can we ask you a little bit of your experience at Il Lavash? Could we ask you about your experience, a little bit of your story when you went to L'Île Lavash?
Hop! You can ask, all right. Well, we rented a boat with a perfectly beautiful captain about that high who knew everything presumably about an outboard motor. 9 of us, a very spiritual number, took the boat. And we had, it was an open rowboat, about as long as from there to here and about that wide. A good solid boat. And we started out. And there was the captain, and thank God he had I don't know what you'd call him, a cabin boy or a boatswain or something or other. Anyway, he had an adjutant about 12 years old. And off we go, with the wind blowing and the whitecaps increasing, and Lavash harbor being just the wrong place. Instead of being the nearest part, it was the furthest part. Anyway, we got there, and then everybody got busy, and they went around and they made contacts with people. And Michael is very useful, and the 2 board members, the 2 assistants of Michael were very, Idris and what's the other fellow? Gaston. They hustled around, and Renee and all of us, and we found a place to hold a meeting, and then we went down by the beach and under some palm trees, and a lady brought out a table from her house, and people began to be added unto us out of curiosity and out of hope for something to eat and this and that. The prefect turned up. He's the prefect for the whole island, who which has 7,500 inhabitants. It's quite a big island. And anyway, the point is that we invited him to sit down and have lunch with us. And we all sat and ate our lunch together. We'd brought, sandwiches and boiled eggs and so on. And then they began to, I asked René to talk, because he's Haitian and he has gray hair. And he's a very old and devoted Baha'i, and he talked very well. And then they began to ask questions. They asked me to say a few words. I just said why we had come to see them, that we were interested in meeting them, and so on, a few words. And then the meeting went on. The next thing I knew, all of a sudden we had 28 enrollments. And after, 2 or 3 hours, wasn't it? How long were we there? 2.5, 3 hours?
The meeting was about 2 hours.
And it went very well. Obviously, what these people know about the Baha'i faith that were enrolled is almost zero. But it doesn't matter, because it's a beginning. It's something to get a hold of, to go back to. But the prefect is, I consider, a very valuable person if he can be cultivated, because he was thoughtful. He kept saying, he had this book, the Baha'i faith, the illustrated one. And they had explained all the pictures to him and read him all of these things. And he said, but I believe this. And I had the impression, then I walked back to the boat with him afterwards. He's a relatively educated man. He understands French quite well, as opposed to just Creole. And I had the feeling that he had capacity, that there was really something there that could be built on. Then the woman who brought out the table was a delightful woman, with, I believe, real capacity to be deepened as a Baha'i. She enrolled too, and her daughters and everybody that was standing around seemed to enroll. And then we left, and the captain seemed to be not too happy about his outboard motor. It's a long way. What did that fellow tell me? He told me 68 kilometers. Could it be that far? Well, it's a hell of a distance, if you don't mind my saying so. When you get out there in a tossing rowboat, it does not look near, John.
Could it be 16 kilometers?
Oh, no. No, sir. Much more than that. When you can barely see the steeple. You can barely see, what do you call the place? Les Cailles, from the island of Ile de la Vache. You can barely see it.
Right there, on the left, Matty, the left. The left.
Calm down, Laurel, please.
Yes, I think so. No, it's not there. It's way over there, and it's a good distance. Well, do you want to hear what happened or not?
Yes.
So then we started back, and 2/3 of the way across, the motor gave up entirely, and they had these perfectly beautiful oars, which are a couple of tree trunks with a huge piece of wood nailed on the end. And they had no oarlocks, which worried me very much and made me very angry. They had exactly one peg to hold four, instead of 2 pegs, and 2 pegs to put your oars in. They had one peg. So they took the rope, and it was all this little boy that was doing everything. He was the only person that had any brain. I would have thrown the captain over, especially when I heard that they had a lot of requins in the water. And anyway, they just bandaged the oars onto the boat. And then we were still a long way from the coast. And Michael was doing the rowing on one side. Thank you very much for your assistance and everything. And the little cabin boy was doing it on the other side. And a sailboat went by with a spanking wind, and a number of people on board, and he kept waving his arms at them, and I waved like this, and nothing happened. They just went straight off into the distance.
They waved back.
Yes. They waved back. Oh, yes, I forgot that. Anyway, the point is that the sun was setting quite near the horizon, so that it could have been, and the wind was rising, and the waves had white caps on them. It could have been a very nasty situation, because I didn't fancy our spending the night in that boat with 7 men. Not that I had anything against the men, but I didn't think it was going to be very private. It was
Actually,
really...
there were 9 men.
Oh, yes, 9 men, excuse me, and you were 9 men. Anyway, the point is that they were rowing. We might eventually, with the rowing, have reached the shore, providing the oar didn't break or something, or the rope. And a sailboat came out. And the thing that, if any of you have ever done any sailing, the thing that fascinated me was that that boat could maneuver so close. She came out, there were 2 people on board, she was this relatively small sailboat, and she maneuvered close enough for the boy to pass the anchor of our boat in the prow to the other boat and then pay off the, the rope of the anchor, and then he towed us, and he got enough wind, there was a good spanking wind, and he towed us all the way into the harbor. Otherwise, we'd still be there probably, or at the bottom of the ocean. What?
They knew that you were in trouble?
The sailboat.
The sailboat knew you were in trouble?
Well, otherwise he wouldn't have come out.
See, he did more than waving back. He just...
Or, alternatively, Pierre
Yes, I
got,
thought that's what...
yes, but you're not sure whether they didn't say something. Oh, that damn dog. I hate dogs. Really.
All dogs are thieves, even Pepita.
No, it's not a question of that. Human beings are not supposed to be sacrificed to everything. And I don't like barking dogs. We have them in Haifa, too. The point is not that. The point is that I think that Pierre, I said, how did you get here? He was waiting on the dock for us. And I said, you didn't plan to be down at his house way up on the hill. He said, well, I just wanted to be sure you got in. So at 5:30, he was down there on the quay waiting for us. Now, whether he noticed we were in trouble and sent that boat out, or the other people that came in and he and everybody else noticed we were in trouble, I don't know. But it's a good distance.
Did you have a success in the other areas of your trip too?
What?
I mean, we hear of the Ile de la Vache, the other spots you went.
Oh, come on, you tell them where we were, Greg. I'm itching, something's bitten me.
Can you take square, maybe?
Huh?
Would you like some square against this one?
Oh, no, I'm all right.
We had excellent meetings everywhere. We stopped in Charlier and Orluk on the way to Kai, and we had a very pleasant meeting in Michael Bannister's house in Kai, and then a very substantial meeting in Torbeck. Michael kept coming back with more truckloads of people, and this place was just wall to wall, more than 50 people there. Very, very good spirit in all those meetings.
No, it was nice meetings, all along the line. Very nice meetings in the Jacques Mel area, very nice meetings in the Le Kai area. On the way going, those 2 villages were very good meetings. I would say that it was eminently successful, and I certainly enjoyed it very much.
You know, that's also in the plan.
That's where,
Not quite so far, but I hope.
no, that's near, that's a good distance.
That's where the invasions took place.
We can certainly arrange something there.
Well, maybe you can invade it too.
What?
You could invade it too.
I wish I knew. Certainly it's not 68 kilometers, obviously. But I'd like very much to know how far it was.
It is 1
You're looking at the wrong island, John.
No, we're looking at the scale.
1 centimeter is 3 kilometers.
Well, how many inches is it if you measure? Anyway, you can see the islands and the
Well, sure you can see it, but that doesn't mean it's near. It's a big island.
It's about 4
You're exhausted. He's a lot worse than any children.
Yeah.
That's 12 to 15 kilometers. I'm surprised it's that far.
No, I think it's more than that.
That would make sense. How many hours did it take to get there?
Boats don't go very
2 hours.
Okay, that could make sense.
More than 2 hours.
That could make sense. So about 16 kilometers, so both boats, about 8 clicks an hour. Is about
No, more than 2 hours with an outboard motor, and a good motor. It worked all right going.
Well, you know, Merger, when you leave Lambie, the Lambie, and you go to Jacmel, Merger is 12 kilometers from Port-au-Prince.
And then it was on the wrong side.
There is a Born, 12 kilometers, and it seems like a huge distance. The only thing is when you get in traffic into Carrefour, you're stuck for half an hour. It makes you feel it's a long distance, but it's short.
Well, I'll tell you, nothing feels a longer distance than a rowboat with the waves coming in practically over you.
The only thing is that on the map, you measure it like that, but the boat doesn't go that way. It goes all around, and it's not straight line.
And then, John, it goes to the end.
Yes. Yes. Right.
Yeah.
Which way around did you go?
You go this way. This is Lake Cod. You see? Now, this is the nearest part of the island. The harbor is there. You see? So that was awful because you could hear the island began to seem quite close. But you had to go all the way along here, way over there, you see. And coming back, fortunately we had the wind behind us, but it was quite a rough sea, and the whitecaps were getting up.
Well, that's supposed to be 20 kilometers.
Anyway, poor Violette and I, it's a new experience. I don't know about you.
The ocean is well done.
I would have rather been in a sailboat, because if there's a wind, they're all right with a sailboat. It may not go as fast as a good outboard motor, but it goes. And of course, the trouble with a rowboat is that this damn pool, excuse my French, it got in the trough of the waves, which is very unpleasant, you see, because it maneuvers itself. It drifts in such a way that instead of having the waves behind it and lifting it like that, it gets this way, and then it's rocking, and the waves are coming towards it in danger of coming into it.
Actually, we had some casualties.
What do you mean
I came
casualties?
back wounded, and Rúhíyyih Khánum's umbrella was broken.
Oh. But my umbrella saved her life. She fell on that instead of breaking her neck or something. She fell on my umbrella, which I would glad to sacrifice in Violette's service.
Little parenthesis, anybody would like to have a boat, a good fiberglass double boat, to go to Ile La Vache. So we have a very good boat craftsman in Jackman.
Now look, come off your perch. How much would it cost?
Well, a boat the size of the length of this room, a little smaller, let's say from the wall until here.
That wall to there?
This wall.
Wide, I hope not.
Wow.
The length,
My dear,
that
that's two bathtubs.
Yes, a little over the
Is that the length or the width?
That's the length. The length. And the width is that much. It's a $700 boat. And this is built two. It's there is the inner what? Hull and the outer hull. There are two hulls.
Do the oars come with it?
Oars, I don't know. But it's a sailboat, and you could attach the motor in the back.
Well, you can always hang an outboard motor on even a bathtub.
Then he has one a little smaller for $400.
How much does an outboard motor cost?
No, they're quite expensive. Yeah, quite
It could be up to $2,000.
An outboard motor? A small outboard motor? That's ridiculous.
A Remington, about $2,000.
Good gracious. Why, when I asked the price of an outboard motor in Panama many years ago, it was only, what, $200, $250?
Yes, I mean. And that was Panama. Ruth Ringel she was quoting every price here, and she was cutting it in half, then in half. And that was the price of Panama. Everything was so cheap in Panama.
No, in those days, many years ago. It depends, you know. You don't have to have a brand new one. If you're a good mechanic and the motor's good, well, you don't need to have a brand new outboard motor. You just need to have a good outboard motor and somebody knows what to do with it, which that captain didn't. No, at least Arnold likes dogs.
That was a very historical trip.
Yes.
Were you the first person to set ashore?
No, I good gracious, they had to draw the boat up and hang on to it. It was tossing like a cocker shell.
But she was the first hand of the cross there.
Probably the last, I can tell you that. I'd like to meet the one that goes in my place next time. Especially you tell him at 2/3 of the way the boat comes out.
Well, Père Léger was flabbergasted that the world center of the Baha'i faith knew enough about world geography that they wanted Île à Vache off Haiti opened up by the Baha'is. So how could an organization headquarters that far away know about a little island like that? It's not even on most maps.
Well, that's an idea. I'm going home and ask the House of Justice, how the devil did you know it was there?
I'm sure Ellsworth Black was sending a very good map years ago.
Did you suggest it, Jilly, the NSA?
Come on, Judy, answer us.
These smart counselors, they never go anywhere in boats.
No, they tell everyone else to.
Yes, they tell everyone else.
Is there some spiritual significance to islands? I get the impression that there is. Abdu'l Bahá certainly made mention of a great many islands in
Well, they're there. Why shouldn't they be taught too?
Yes, but they seem to be... Haiti, for instance, is mentioned, I think, 3 times in tablets of divine plan. Very few countries are mentioned at all. Haiti and Dominican Republic.
Well, it's a pretty historic part of the world, you know. After all, Christopher Columbus got here before he got there.
And they were the first black republic.
Yes, very historic.
Here's a question for you. Coming from a Jewish background, I don't understand this being saved business completely.
You don't what?
I don't understand the business of being saved.
Being saved? Safe or saved?
Saved. We used to get tracts under our door at home.
Really? You must have
Because
resented
being
it.
one of 5 Jewish families in an otherwise Baptist, Mennonite, and Pentecostal, whatever else there was population. We five. I should have kept them. I'd have had a good collection. And this idea of being saved was very much a part of it. And the way I understand it is that if you believe in Jesus, you will be saved, which means you go to heaven. If you don't believe in Jesus,
you go to hell.
You're going to hell. Now, this sometimes comes up.
Yeah.
And I found a way. Maybe I found a way of dealing with it, but I'm not sure in my own way, in my own mind, what the writings are communicating. Sometimes I get the impression the writings are communicating that if you're not a Baha'i, this is maybe putting it in very simple terms.
It's the same principle, Joe, for all religions. You have to accept the point of guidance and adoration, the messenger of God, for that period in history. You got saved through Moses in the days of Moses. You got saved through Jesus in the days of Jesus. You got saved through Muhammad in the days of Muhammad. You get saved through Baha'u'llah in the days of Baha'u'llah. Just as simple as that.
That's what I thought. Then
We better put another tract under his door.
Yes.
But this,
Have you heard of the Baha'i faith?
What's that, Baha?
Yes.
But then someone will say to me, invariably says to me, that means if you're not a Baha'i, you're not saved. And you're just like all the other religions. Yours is the best.
Well, I don't know how you maneuver yourself in that position. I'm very good at not getting cornered.
Because we do.
I'd like to answer that, if I may. There's something Abdu'l Bahá said, that a Christian could attain, could fulfill Christianity, even if he never heard of the Baha'i faith, and he lived according to the teachings of Christ.
What? Come again?
Abdu'l Bahá, maybe I'm paraphrasing it.
You
Abdu'l
better
Bahá
not,
said,
you know. You heard my opening speech tonight.
Yes, I did. Yes, that the person, a Christian or a Muslim or a Jew, even if he never heard of the teachings of Baha'u'llah, but if he lives according to the writings of his own religion, I lost myself.
I think it's very good to lose yourself. But Joe, let me tell you something which I heard about last week. It's marvelous because it applies to you also. Rúhíyyih Khánum was talking about, somebody asked about this being
What's
saved
that, dear?
business.
I don't want anything. I'm
then
full.
it
I don't
went on, and Khánum said that in this room we have got all people of Christian background, and she turned to me and she said, and Violette her father is Jewish and her mother is Muslim. So this man turned around and said, oh, it's all right with you, you are saved already because you come from Jewish.
Somebody said
Wasn't that?
yes.
So I wanted to tell you, if next time they talk about saving, you say,
That's good to know.
He said your saving is much easier because you're Jewish. That was the magistrat in Jacmel. It must be easy for you.
Yeah, but see, this gets something. I was on Lagunav Island professionally. It was a research study I was doing for Church World Service. So naturally, I couldn't do much travel teaching. But half the island is Wesleyan, controlled by American Wesleyans, and the other half is controlled by American Methodists. I don't know which sect, the Free Will or the No Will, but one of the Wills, Methodists, controls that part. And they got very much interested on those islands between those two different sects. There's not much fun because the Wesleyans discourage anything that even looks like fun. And the Methodists weren't much better. And so the entertainment on that island for most people seems to be going to church and sitting around and talking about being saved. And somebody asked me the question, because since I was working for Church World Service at the time, some people thought I was a pastor. I corrected it, but if you don't believe in Jesus, you're not saved. And they asked me that question. And I forget what I said. I somehow got over it. Said something that people like. But I was interested in this because people have said to me, very simply, well, that means you Baha'is you say you want to unite people, but you're dividing people too because you're telling them if they're not Baha'is, they're not saved. They're not really spiritually going to develop. Yet, we also teach that we must not force people.
Joe, just sidestep it. Don't get into these controversial issues. That shows you're Jewish. We live in Israel, after all, we ought to know. That's all right. That really choked him off. Yes?
Do you feel that the spirit of Baha'u'llah is working through all the different aspects of society, organizations, and institutions, and not just through Baha'is and Baha'i faith, but throughout all of society, all through races and governments?
Well, I can't, I don't know what Baha'u'llah is doing, frankly. I don't profess to be it's private information. But I don't know what
I'm quoting you, when you told Mark Doherty back in '61 that you had never heard of Baha'u'llah sending anyone a postcard.
What? What did you say? Jilly, what did you just say?
When you asked Mark where he was planning to go when he was mustered out of the army, he said, well, where did Baha'u'llah want to go? I asked him again, and he said, well, now listen, Mark, I've never heard of Baha'u'llah sending anyone a postcard. Don't you remember that?
No. Thank God I don't remember the things I've said. What's that thing?
He does send telegrams.
Herb tea. Oh, that's all right. That's fine. Herb tea. What kind of herb?
Lemon balm.
Well, all right. Won't kill me. Thank you very kindly. No, what I want to answer her question because I can only answer it the way Shoghi Effendi did.
More quiet.
When you're ready, Laura.
Well, actually, not to tie my shoelaces.
Well, why didn't you let her?
No, because my feet are swollen.
Oh, all right. Now we've settled that issue.
Is it on tape? I hope it's not on tape.
Morrow, keep quiet, for heaven's sake. I'm going home in a minute. She wants to have a question answered. Shoghi Effendi gave the really most marvelous example of this subject. He said that two plans at work in the world. There's our plan as Baha'is, which is the plans inside the Baha'i faith, inside the faith of Baha'u'llah, in other words. And we are working to achieve the beginning of the dawn of a new era, if you like, through the execution of the divine plan of Abdul Bahá and the implementation of the different plans. First, the plans of Shoghi Effendi, now the plans of the House of Justice. But these are entirely internal plans run by the Baha'is and executed by the Baha'is. Then he said there is another plan, which is the plan of God, and over which we have no control whatsoever. Nobody has. And that God can work through politics, He can work through war, He can work through earthquakes, He can work through floods, He can work through famine, He can work through any means that He wishes to shape the destiny of the world, you see. That these major forces are the forces used by God to shape the destiny of the world. He said, and we, in the meantime, have specific plans for the execution of our own Baha'i work. And he said, eventually, these two plans would meet. And I think it's the most marvelous, simple example of what is happening to the world. God is leading the world through His own forces. We Baha'is are fulfilling the plan of Baha'u'llah through obeying the instructions and plans given us by the Master, the Guardian, and now the House of Justice. It's very lucid, very clear. I have nothing to do with the rest of the world. What can I do about the world? What can any of us or all of us do about the major plan, what is happening in the world? Nothing at all. But I have a great deal that I can do for our own plans.
Because we hear interesting things like one time I read in a magazine, a non-Baha'i magazine, where it said that the only time we would achieve world peace is when the women would be more involved in the institutions, in government,
well, it should in theory be true, but it isn't true at all. Because we've had a number of women politicians in the highest positions in this century. We've had the President, Prime Minister of India, Prime Minister of England, Prime Minister Bangladesh, and so on. Isn't making, Sri Lanka is not making the least bit of difference.
I have a question a little bit different to Joe's, whether Joe's safe or not. Not, maybe I have all these veils in front of my eyes, but it seems to me that I've met some pretty spiritual Jews and Christians. I don't know very many Arabs personally, or Muslims personally, and it seems to me that that they seem closer to our Creator than some Baha'is that are on the list, obviously. And so, obviously, I understand that, the latest manifestation is the one you've got to follow. And if you really investigate this latest manifestation, if somebody's told you about it, or heard about it, and you investigate it, you really investigate it, then you ought to see the truth in it and get on the boat, in the ark. Well, I don't know. At this point, I can't say that, Joe Schmo, who lives down the road and goes to his church or synagogue and is very sincere and seems like a very good person to me, is not saved. Whatever that means. That this, again, is terminology.
But I do think that it's perhaps a different... Your metaphor is perhaps wrong. In the first place, I don't think anybody knows who is saved. You don't know how saved or unsaved they are, and you certainly don't know how saved or unsaved your fellow Baha'is are, because none of our business to judge each other. I mean, how do I know anything about anybody else's soul but mine? I barely know anything about my own soul. I don't know anything about your soul, or what state of development you're in, or whether you're saved or not saved, or a good Baha'i or bad Baha'i. And frankly, I shouldn't have any opinion on the subject. I should mind my own business and do my own Baha'i work, and never mind about you, because my hands are full with myself. But the other thing is another principle. You're not plugged into the circuit spiritually, like plugging into the electricity in this house, unless you make the contact with the manifestation of God for this day. And that's perfectly clear in the writings of all the religions of the world, including our own. Now, if you don't like it, I don't know about that. Tell them the story about Faisy and the Ark, Violette.
Well, as Greg said.
Oh, Greg said. You repeat it. It was a delightful story.
We were reminded of this as we were bobbing up and down the middle of the seat. Mr. Faisy, Henry the Cause, was giving a talk in Germany, and in very, very short sentences, which were being translated, he said, "We are all voyagers in the ark of the Holy Mariner." Translated. And then he said, "It may be crowded in the ark, or it may not be clean as we like it, or we may not like the food in the ark. We may not like some of our fellow passengers in the ark. We may even think the Holy Mariner doesn't know, is not guiding the boat properly. But if we leave the ark, we're out in the high seas." What's that?
But then at the same time, some souls' cups are so filled that we could talk about the faith till they're blue in the face. They don't see it, they're blind. Yet they're filled, like it's, like Maddie was saying, you can't see, well, they're condemned or they're on the, I don't know if you could even say they're on the wrong path if their cup is filled. And they cannot seem to, like my mother, for example, she could never accept the Baha'i faith. She's a staunch Catholic. For her to become a Baha'i would be a catastrophe. She would be completely miserable, completely unhappy, like she...
Well, it wouldn't be a catastrophe if she accepted it.
Why can't she become a Baha'i?
Because evidently she hasn't got the receptivity. And there's nothing that you can do about that. Anybody can do about it. Oh, I wonder what that gurgling sound was.
Just another dog. You know, in Georgia, when the mass teaching was going on, everyone was running around needing to raise numbers right away. And I couldn't understand why that was going on. And people would say, "Roby, you know, how many Baha'is have you brought into the faith this month?" And I would say, "No, but none." And months would go by. "How many Baha'is have you brought in the last 6 months?" And I would say, "None."
You got the wrong answer. You should say it's none of your damn business.
Well, I felt the same way too, but what happened, they said, "Well, aren't you teaching?" And I said, "Well, what I think is teaching, yes." And they said, "Well, what's that?" And I said, "Well, I'm telling them about Baha'u'llah." And what I felt I was doing was I was just planting a seed. And I always took the opportunity to mention it. And then like 5 years later, 3 people became Baha'is. And they said, "Well, how did you hear about the faith?" Well, they said, "Some time ago, this girl in a wheelchair told me about the faith." And just the other day I thought, well, I heard about something and it triggered that memory. And I said, well, let me go and see. And so I said, "Well, you see, there it is. It was my teaching, you know." But it was interesting. What I tried to do in Georgia, and I try to do here, is I try to mention it in many ways that I can. But once I mention it, then I let it go. And I let it become the responsibility between the person and God. But I never tried to think, well, why haven't they come behind it, you know? I never tried to
Probably that's your method. We all have to be allowed to teach according to our own possibilities. I, for instance, could never under any circumstances sit on a wall, on a street, play the guitar, sing Baha'i songs, and get a crowd around me and hand them something to sign. It is too far from my nature, but it doesn't mean that it's wrong for somebody else to do it, you see. Now, if people don't go out and enroll them the way we did the other day on that island, they are never going to have anything happen, because we can't go over there and build a mission. We have no place to stay. We have no place for people to send over there to live. We don't have missionaries, we don't have priests, we don't have lay preachers. So all we can do is what we did do. We went over there and in good faith, we told them as much as we possibly could about the faith. That Baha'i faith, the pamphlet, has all the essentials of the Baha'i faith in it. It may be very simple, but it's got everything in it that is anybody needs to know that this is the truth if they just use their head and accept it, you see. And if they want to accept it, you should let them. And sometimes those people become very deep Baha'is, very attached to the faith. And sometimes they just, as Moro said, they drift in and they drift out, and you never see them again, and that's it. We should use all methods of teaching.
But the best one is to go back.
Go back. Go back. This is our great lack, partly lack of manpower and partly just sheer lack of perhaps sufficient conscientious effort. We just don't go back. We don't see them again. We don't shower more love on them. We don't answer their questions. We don't tell them more.
But when we go back, we don't have necessarily to give them a deepening. Sometimes if we just go there and just be very friendly, and even talk about their greens and their cows and their things, and then go home, they love it.
Shoghi Effendi, about teaching in Africa, he used a very beautiful metaphor. He said you have to nurse them. Rúhíyyih Khánum was talking about babies. He used the same thing. He said you have to nurse them. You can't just have the baby and leave it
to grow up.
To grow by itself. You are the nurse. You have to go and nurse the baby.
But also nobody knows. You see, if you do your duty, then really that's all you can do. But I do think you ought to make an effort to do your duty, do what is possible for you, you see. I think one of the loveliest stories I've ever heard was an experience of Dr. Adalbert Mühlschlegel. I don't know whether you heard about it in Germany. Adalbert, after the passing of the Guardian, traveled a tremendous amount. And he had wait a moment, he had what is the word for that? Well, anyway, what it amounts to is it's a bubble on his heart. Has a technical word, and it can aneurysm, and it can can go just like that. It can pop, and then you drop dead. Well, with that condition, he traveled thousands of miles all over Europe, driving the car and visiting different countries. So once he was in Sweden with his son was driving at that time with him. Anyway, he read in a newspaper somewhere up in the north of Sweden an article saying that a man in some small Swedish town was fasting for 19 days. So he thought, 19 days, that's funny. And he wasn't very far away from that place, so he went to that town and he found that man. And he found that this man had been in the United States at the time that Amatu'l Bahá was in America. He had attended a lecture, I don't know, in California, probably visiting relatives or something, had attended a lecture of Amatu'l Bahá. All he remembered was that how wonderful the master was, this holy man. And then he said that in the Baha'i faith you fasted for 19 days, from sunrise to sunset. And he bought a Baha'i prayer book, and he went back to Sweden, to his little town, and he never heard anything about the Baha'i faith again until Adalbert went to see him. But he fasted all those years, because that's all he knew. Isn't that pretty marvelous? So then Adalbert said, but there are lots of Baha'is in Sweden. And he talked to him about the faith, in other words, and he brought him to the National Convention, which was approaching. And when this man came in this room and saw all these Swedish Baha'is and realized that these were the people that followed Amatu'l Bahá, that he had believed in so long ago, he just burst into tears, and practically the whole convention burst into tears too. But then it didn't prevent them from giving him the works, and he had to read this and study that. Yes, but I mean that shows, you see, we don't know. What do we know? So very little. Just let's go ahead doing what we can, conscientiously, prayerfully, our Baha'i duty. That's all you can do. Each one of us. It's the dog again.
You might want a dog.
Your dog lacks discipline, if I may say so.
Oh, you telling me? He came to us that way. We didn't want him, believe me.
Why don't you give him to a farmer? Because the farmer won't feed him. That's the answer.
Yeah. I'm going to give him to Maddie, though. She said they needed a guard dog.
Good dog or guard dog?
Look, you don't hear, the dog will bark all the time. You won't be able to hear one word in the classes.
You already have dogs there. Going through the classes.
He's very much like the Arab dogs, these dogs. They just bark all the time.
For no reason.
They all do in this country. You can hear them all.
No, but they're like the Arab dogs. The Arab dogs are like that. You never know whether the devil is out there with a shotgun or he's just exercising his vocal
I
cords.
tell you, the Israeli ones are the same thing. It's not just the Arab.
The Arabs are like that too. I don't mean the dogs.
Did the Holy
They bark
Family,
all the time, too.
did the family of Baha'u'llah keep any pets?
No, especially dogs are considered very dirty in Islam. And although they kept the Arabs watchdogs outside, they really were never, they're just watchdogs or shepherd dogs, but they're never allowed inside. And they didn't keep pets in the house. They had a parrot.
Didn't Amatu'l Bahá have a cat? Or am I mistaken?
At one time, I think there was but you see, we have the wrong concept. We picture Baha'u'llah sitting, stroking a great big Persian cat by the hour. There may have been a cat downstairs in the mansion, but he was not sitting on the lap of the manifestation of God being stroked. If your husband's tired, where is he? I'm tired too.
Ready to go home.
I'd like to go home too.
I just wanted to tell you that it's delightful. Thank you.
Well, thank you. I've enjoyed myself immensely, but I'm dying to go home.
Okay, Khánum.
I think we'll all go home. It's getting late. Everybody has to work tomorrow. We're all going to see each other again. What's the date? Pray to see each other. Go to bed.
Very